Most people believe they're moving forward because the numbers on their paycheck keep getting bigger. Year after year, the salary rises, the income looks healthier, and there's a quiet sense of progress. But what almost no one realizes is that something invisible is working against them every single day, slowly undoing that progress without ever announcing itself. Inflation doesn't arrive like a crisis. It doesn't demand attention. It quietly changes the rules in the background while people keep playing the same game, thinking they're winning. And that's what makes it so dangerous. You feel richer while becoming poorer. You work harder, earn more, yet somehow feel stuck, pressured, and financially exhausted. This contradiction isn't bad luck or poor discipline, it's mathematics. Inflation, at its core, is the steady erosion of purchasing power. It means the same money buys less over time. A salary raise only matters if it allows you to buy more than you could before. Otherwise, it's just a bigger number masking the same reality. Many workers celebrate a 3% raise without realizing that prices quietly rose faster. When inflation exceeds your raise, the raise doesn't move you forward, it moves you backward. The problem is that humans think in nominal terms. We focus on the dollar amount, not what that dollar actually does. That mental shortcut is where inflation hides. Consider how easily this illusion forms. Someone earning $50,000 receives a raise and now earns $51,500. On paper, that feels like success. But if prices rose more than income, that new salary doesn't carry the same weight. Rent, groceries, insurance, fuel, utilities, everything demands slightly more. No single purchase feels alarming, but together they quietly drain the raise. The result is subtle frustration. You're earning more, but saving less. You're advancing professionally, but standing still financially. That treadmill sensation isn't psychological, it's real. Over long periods, the effect compounds. A career filled with steady raises can still result in zero real progress if those raises merely track inflation. Decades of effort can produce nothing more than maintenance. The numbers look impressive when viewed in isolation, but once adjusted for rising prices, the progress disappears. This is why so many people feel betrayed later in life. They did everything they were told to do, worked consistently, stayed loyal, accepted annual raises, yet never achieved the financial freedom they expected. Inflation collected the difference. What makes this worse is that inflation doesn't hit evenly. Certain costs rise faster than others. Housing, healthcare, education, and insurance often outpace general inflation. Even if your salary keeps up with average price increases, the things you actually rely on may be accelerating faster. This creates a slow squeeze. A larger portion of income gets locked into necessities, leaving less flexibility, less margin, and less room to invest. People don't feel poorer because of one big expense. They feel poorer because everything demands a little more every year. This is why focusing solely on salary growth is misleading. Income growth without purchasing power growth is an illusion. A real raise is one that feels good emotionally, but one that beats inflation mathematically. And most people never measure that difference. They look at effort and outcome emotionally rather than structurally. Inflation thrives in that gap. Understanding this changes how you view money, work, and progress. It reframes success away from visible numbers and toward real outcomes. Without this understanding, people spend their lives reacting, working harder, chasing raises, upgrading lifestyles, without realizing they're playing defense against a force that never rests. Inflation doesn't need to defeat you dramatically. It only needs time.
Once you understand that inflation is quietly eroding purchasing power, the next realization is even more uncomfortable. Most careers are structurally designed to keep people treading water. The standard annual raise feels like recognition, but in reality, it is often nothing more than a cost of living adjustment disguised as progress. Employers rarely say this out loud, but a raise that simply matches inflation doesn't reward performance. It merely prevents pay from falling behind. The danger is that employees interpret these raises as upward momentum, when in real terms they are often standing still. Over long time horizons, this illusion becomes brutal. A person may look back at their salary history and feel proud seeing it double or even triple over decades, but when those numbers are adjusted for inflation, the story changes completely. What appears to be growth often turns out to be preservation. The lifestyle improves slightly here and there, but not because purchasing power increased, only because spending habits shifted, debt expanded, or savings declined. The emotional satisfaction of higher income masks the economic reality underneath. This is why inflation is best understood as a silent tax on time. It doesn't demand payment up front. It collects slowly, year by year, by shrinking what each future dollar can do. And because humans plan life forward while inflation works backward, most people never feel the damage until much later. Retirement calculations expose this harshly. Someone can retire earning far more than they ever did early in their career, yet find that their standard of living feels strangely familiar. Different numbers, same pressure. Another overlooked factor is how inflation punishes predictability. Workers who rely on stable, incremental raises are the most vulnerable. Fields with rigid pay bands, limited competition, or low bargaining power tend to trap people in inflation-neutral trajectories. Meanwhile, those who move, negotiate, or work in high-demand skill areas often escape this trap, not because they work harder, but because their income resets to market value instead of creeping upward slowly. Inflation doesn't hurt ambition as much as it hurts stagnation. This explains why job mobility has such a dramatic effect on lifetime earnings. When someone changes roles, they're no longer comparing themselves to last year's salary, they're compared to today's market. That reset often produces income jumps large enough to break free from inflation's grip. Staying in one place, by contrast, allows inflation to quietly reclaim each raise before it has time to matter. Loyalty may feel safe, but financially it often means surrendering purchasing power inch by inch. There's also a psychological cost. People sense something is wrong long before they understand inflation mathematically. They feel pressure increasing despite doing better. They feel forced to budget harder despite earning more. This creates frustration, burnout, and confusion. Many blame themselves for not managing money well, when the real issue is that their income never truly advanced in real terms. Inflation turns effort into exhaustion when it isn't confronted directly. The most dangerous consequence of all is delayed awareness. Inflation doesn't ruin people quickly, it wastes their best years. By the time the pattern becomes obvious, decades have passed. Opportunities to compound real growth have been missed. This is why understanding inflation early matters more than earning a high salary late. Time amplifies both mistakes and solutions. At this point, the problem is clear. Raises alone are not enough. Income growth must exceed inflation consistently, not occasionally. Otherwise, a career becomes a long exercise in maintenance rather than advancement. Recognizing this is not pessimistic, it's empowering, because once the illusion is removed, the strategy changes. Money is no longer judged by size, but by strength. Progress is no longer measured by salary, but by purchasing power. This shift in thinking is where real control begins. Inflation thrives on ignorance and complacency. Awareness alone doesn't defeat it, but it prevents you from being fooled by numbers that look impressive while delivering nothing. And once you see inflation for what it is, a constant force rather than a temporary problem, you stop waiting for relief and start designing around it.
Once income is understood in real terms, a deeper truth emerges. Earning more is only half the equation. What ultimately determines financial progress is what happens to the money after it's earned. Inflation punishes idle money just as efficiently as it punishes stagnant wages. Cash feels safe because it doesn't fluctuate, but stability is deceptive when purchasing power is shrinking. Money that doesn't grow faster than inflation is quietly losing value, even while the balance stays the same. This is why simply saving is no longer enough. Preservation without growth is slow decline. Inflation exposes the weakness of fixed returns. Assets that promise certainty, cash, low-yield savings, fixed interest instruments, offer psychological comfort at the cost of real loss. When prices rise year after year, these instruments fail to adjust. They don't fight inflation, they surrender to it. Over long periods, this surrender becomes devastating. What feels like discipline becomes stagnation. People believe they're being responsible, while inflation steadily reduces the future value of every saved dollar. The only effective defense is ownership in things that can adapt. Assets that respond to inflation by raising prices, expanding revenue, or increasing intrinsic value are fundamentally different. Businesses, especially strong ones, don't absorb inflation, they pass it on. When costs rise, prices adjust, revenue follows. Over time, ownership in productive assets grows alongside the economy rather than shrinking beneath it. This is not speculation, it's alignment. Inflation rewards flexibility, and productive assets are flexible by design. This is where investing stops being optional and becomes essential. Investing is not about chasing returns, it's about protecting purchasing power. The long-term record is clear. Assets tied to real economic output grow faster than inflation over time. They experience volatility, but volatility is not loss. Loss is failing to grow while prices do. The discomfort of market swings is temporary. The damage from inflation is permanent. Compounding amplifies this difference dramatically. A small advantage over inflation, sustained consistently, becomes overwhelming over decades. What begins as a modest gap quietly turns into independence. This is why time matters more than timing. Inflation compounds against you when money is idle, and compounding works for you when money is invested productively. The direction matters far more than the speed. Many people misunderstand risk at this stage. They fear visible fluctuations while ignoring invisible erosion. Inflation thrives because it doesn't trigger fear responses. There's no red warning sign when purchasing power slips by 2 or 3% a year. But over 10, 20, 30 years, that quiet loss outweighs almost any short-term market decline. The real risk is not volatility, it's complacency. This understanding reframes investing entirely. It's no longer about outperforming others or predicting markets. It's about refusing to let inflation dictate your future. Ownership becomes a necessity, not a strategy. When money is placed where it can grow faster than prices rise, time stops being an enemy and starts becoming an ally. At this point, the picture is clear. Inflation attacks income first, savings second, and ignorance always. Fighting it requires intention. Passive behavior guarantees passive loss. Progress only happens when growth is real, measurable, and sustained. Anything else is just movement without distance.
Even when income grows and investments are working properly, there is another force that quietly undoes progress for most people, and it often causes more damage than inflation itself. This force doesn't come from the economy, it comes from behavior. As income increases, spending tends to rise automatically. Better housing, better cars, better vacations, more convenience. None of these decisions feel reckless. In fact, they feel earned. But when spending grows alongside income, the benefits of raises and investments never fully materialize. This is lifestyle inflation, and it is the reason many high earners still feel financially trapped. Lifestyle inflation is subtle because it feels like reward. People don't suddenly become irresponsible, they simply adjust their baseline. What once felt like a luxury slowly becomes a necessity.
Expenses lock in at higher levels, leaving little room to maneuver. When inflation then pushes prices higher, the pressure intensifies. Income might still be rising, but flexibility disappears. The margin for error shrinks. At that point, even small financial disruptions feel threatening. The danger is not spending more, it's spending every increase. When raises are absorbed entirely by lifestyle upgrades, wealth never compounds. The person appears successful from the outside, but internally remains dependent on constant income growth just to maintain stability. This is fragile progress. It relies on everything going right. Inflation, job loss, health issues, or market shifts expose how thin the margin really is. The alternative approach is far less exciting, but far more powerful, keeping lifestyle stable while income rises. This creates a widening gap between what you earn and what you need. That gap is where freedom forms. When raises are redirected instead of consumed, purchasing power grows even if inflation remains persistent. Over time, this discipline compounds more reliably than any single financial decision. This principle explains why some people build wealth on moderate incomes while others struggle despite earning far more. The difference is not intelligence or opportunity, it's restraint. Inflation already works relentlessly against purchasing power. Lifestyle inflation simply accelerates the damage by removing any defensive buffer. Together, they trap people in permanent dependence on their next paycheck. What makes this especially important is that lifestyle inflation often feels irreversible. Once expenses rise, reducing them feels like failure rather than strategy. This psychological barrier keeps people locked into choices that no longer serve them. Inflation then exploits that rigidity, turning once comfortable lifestyles into sources of stress. Real progress comes from resisting this drift, not permanently, not painfully, but intentionally. When income increases faster than spending, inflation loses leverage, money gains momentum, time begins to work in your favor rather than against you. This is where financial growth becomes visible, not just on paper, but in peace of mind. At this stage, the pattern is complete. Inflation erodes wages, idle money loses value, and uncontrolled spending prevents recovery. Each piece alone is manageable. Together, they explain why so many people work their entire lives without ever feeling secure. Understanding this is not about fear, it's about clarity. Once behavior aligns with reality, inflation stops being a mystery and becomes a known opponent, one that can be outpaced.
At the end of it all, inflation isn't the villain people imagine it to be. It's not dramatic, sudden, or malicious. It's simply constant, and that constancy is what makes it powerful. Inflation doesn't destroy wealth in a single blow. It erodes it through neglect. It rewards those who adapt and quietly punishes those who assume stability means safety. Most people never lose because they make terrible decisions. They lose because they never make intentional ones. The central mistake is confusing movement with progress. Higher salaries, larger balances, and rising numbers feel like advancement, but without adjusting for inflation, those numbers are empty. Real progress is measured only in purchasing power, what your money can actually do for your life. Once this becomes the lens through which decisions are made, priorities change. Raises are evaluated against inflation. Savings are judged by growth, not comfort. Spending is examined for permanence, not pleasure. What separates people who build lasting wealth from those who don't is not access to secret strategies, it's awareness applied consistently over time. The people who win financially understand that inflation never stops, so their response never stops either. They seek income growth that exceeds inflation, not matches it. They place money where it can grow faster than prices rise, and they resist the instinct to inflate their lifestyle every time income increases. This combination is rare because it lacks immediate gratification. It requires patience, discipline, and the ability to ignore social comparison.
Inflation exploits impatience. It thrives when people want results now instead of durability later. But time is unforgiving to shortcuts. Only real growth survives decades. Everything else fades under rising costs. The most dangerous outcome isn't poverty, it's false confidence. Inflation convinces people they're doing well enough, so they stop questioning the structure beneath their finances. Years pass, opportunities compound elsewhere. Then one day, the realization arrives too late that progress never actually happened. Avoiding this fate doesn't require perfection, it requires honesty about numbers, behavior, and reality. Inflation will always exist. That's not a flaw in the system, it's a feature of it. The choice is whether to let it quietly dictate your future or consciously design around it. Once you understand the difference between nominal growth and real growth, you stop chasing bigger numbers and start building stronger ones. That shift alone changes everything. The people who succeed long-term aren't smarter, they're aligned. Their income, investments, and lifestyle all move in the same direction, ahead of inflation. That alignment turns time from an enemy into an asset, and over a lifetime, that difference compounds into freedom.